Welcome everyone who's starting to tune in. We're going to get started in a minute or so, but in the meantime, we invite you to share your name and where you're tuning in from into the chat. And if you want to make sure that everyone else in our session today can see your response, you can select the option to send your chat to everyone. Great, we already got some representation across the region and across the ocean and internationally. It's always fun to watch this and see who's starting to join us. Okay, so I'll let folks continue to just share your name and where you're tuning in from. And I'll just start our session off. I'm Katie Trazo. I'm a network specialist at Virginia Tech, and I support a number of different projects, and two of them are the Virginia Tech Catawba Sustainability Center's Forest Herb Network and the Virginia Beginning Farmer and Rancher Coalition. And I'm just supporting today, helping to get our event started and welcome you here on behalf of a number of partners, including the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition, Penn State, and NC State. So I'll share a few technical logistics, and then I'll introduce our speakers for the day. First, you'll notice that your line is automatically muted and your video is not enabled. That's because this is a Zoom webinar instead of a Zoom meeting. And that just means that the main way you'll be able to interface with us today is through the chat feature if you'd like to share comments, and the Q&A feature if you'd like to add questions. So definitely want to direct people with their questions to that Q&A feature so we can keep track of them. And we also want to let you know that automatic live captions are available. If you're not already seeing them, you can enable them by clicking the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom pane. And you can either see them in subtitles or in a full transcript, which kind of shows up similar to your chat feature. And if you'd like to turn them off, if they're already showing up automatically, you can also click that button and turn them off. We also want to let you know that this session is being recorded and it will be archived on the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition's website. And if you're having any technical difficulties tonight, you're welcome to reach out to me, Katie Trazo, in the chat. You can also email me if you need to at ketrazo@vt.edu. And we have Stesha Warren here on backup tech support. She's putting all of this information in the chat. So thanks so much, Stesha. And we want to let you know that this webinar tonight is part of a 5-webinar series. It's the last one in our series, and we really developed this in collaboration to serve a need to explore more of the 201 information on non-timber forest products. And so we have all the other NTFPs that we've focused on so far archived on the website, so we invite you to check that out. And also for each of those sessions, we pulled together a 101 learning module that just collects all the information that the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition has developed over the years, the basic information on each of these topics. So today, if you find you're missing some fundamental information, Stesha will be sharing that resource in the chat so you can go back to some of the 101 information. So today, our last session here is a closer look at Goldenseal and non-timber forest products. And we're going to have a 201 presentation, and then we'll have some time to hear from a farmer. And then we'll have also time to hear from you all with your questions for our speakers and panelists today to respond to. With that, I'll introduce, let's see. Sorry, y'all. We have a mistake typo on our slide, which I will correct. But I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers today. Dr. Jeanine Davis is an associate professor and extension specialist in the Department of Horticultural Science at NC State University. She's located at a research and extension center in Western North Carolina near Asheville. For over 30 years, she has researched new crops, vegetables, and organic agriculture, and she shared her knowledge on these topics with farmers and home gardeners across the country. Her current efforts are focused on woodland botanicals, hops, truffles, organic vegetables, and hemp. She's the lead author of a book, Growing and Marketing Ginseng, Goldenseal, and Other Woodland Medicinals. Jeanine and her family operate Our Tiny Farm, where they raise bees for honey and they board mini donkeys. We also have Margaret Bloomquist. Margaret has worked alongside Jeanine since 2012. Margaret's a research associate at the NC Alternative Crops and Organics program, which is in the Department of Horticultural Science at NC State University. They're based in Western North Carolina, and she engages with medicinal herbs, woodland botanicals, organic vegetables, the Eastern Broccoli Project, and other specialty crop research and extension efforts. Margaret received a Bachelor of Science in Global Resource Systems from the University of British Columbia and a graduate certificate in Rural Project Management from Makerere University in 2006. And the typo here, we actually have Joe Ginseng with us. After serving in a combat tank battalion in Iraq, Joe obtained a degree in biology and outdoor experiential education. He found a love for North Carolina, and his family purchased a 30-acre farm. He worked for the National Outdoor Leadership School as an instructor in Yukon and Alaska, teaching outdoor wilderness and tech skills such as mountaineering and backcountry travel in very remote regions of the Northwest Territory and the Brooks Range of Alaska. Traveling throughout the summer with a farm in NC and a passion to want to produce something on the land opened his mind to all kinds of ideas. He also began working as a purchasing agent for a large botanical company and would travel to the Everglades of Florida to buy saw palmetto berries from pickers. When the owner of that company sold him 30 pounds of ginseng seed in early 2000, it was an obvious jump off point in his journey into the medicinals of the forest. Since then, he has expanded into growing goldenseal, black cohosh, ramps, and a very small patch of false unicorn. He does direct sales to buyers who are alternative medical professionals, tea shop owners, and apothecaries. He also has a full-time daughter at home, a small herd of Scottish Highland cattle, a few pigs, a mess of chickens, and a highly skilled team of rodent-killing farm cats. I think we'll see some pictures of those later. And just want to take a moment to acknowledge everyone who's here with us today. We have over 100 participants, and just really grateful for the ways we're woven together in this network and community, and how we all express love for the land, and just invite you to take a moment to sense and feel into the lands that you call home, the waters that run through them, and the people who have loved them over generations and generations, and especially honoring the traditional custodians of the lands where we live. And just wanted to take a moment to honor the Tutelo and Monacan people who have tended the lands where I'm situated now, and invite you just to bring that presence and awareness, because we're definitely moving forward the culture around how we are with these plants. And I'm grateful to be in that with you all. With that, I will pass it on to Dr. Jeanine Davis.
Thank you, Katie. And Margaret's going to switch over here and bring up her PowerPoint. The way we're going to organize this evening is Margaret's going to start out, and she's going to talk about the growing side of things with Goldenseal and some of the other more popular non-timber forest products. I'm then going to talk about how we make money, or you can make money growing these. And then Joe's going to carry on as our grower who is actually living and doing this. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Margaret. Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks, everybody. I'm Margaret Bloomquist. I'm happy to have you all here over Zoom tonight. I know I saw many familiar folks in the participant list and lots of new names as well. So we look forward to interacting in this way and carrying forward. We are going to talk about how to make money, or how people are or could make money growing Goldenseal and some of the other woodland botanicals. We've already talked about ginseng and ramps and some other specifics in this webinar series, so you'll hear reference to that as well as some of the pre-webinar resources. As Jeanine and I were putting together this presentation, we realized we wanted to swap out some of our photos. Been using a lot of the same photos for a long time. So you'll see hopefully some new photos tonight if you've been working with us in the recent past, and also want to acknowledge that not all these photos are ours, and we have acknowledged on each slide whose those are.
And I hope if you see some of your photos that brings you joy. If it doesn't, let me know and I'll change it.
And again, these are all for educational purposes. So we're going to introduce you to some of the woodland botanicals other than ginseng that have market demand or have rising interest that can be grown in our forests. Some similarities between all these plants we'll point out, as well as some specific differences that we found and folks have shared with us along the way in their forest farming journeys to date. So some things these plants have in common is they're all wild or somewhat naturalized species. So they may not respond in the same way as other crops we're used to that have been cultivated for some times. These are all perennials. Most of them are herbaceous perennials, and they usually grow for at least 3 years before we're harvesting. Roots are the primary plant part of interest, though as you'll see, that's expanding as well to leaf markets and other things. And again, all of these plants are native to our region. We're speaking from Western North Carolina, but trying to encompass all up and down North and South Appalachia, as well as into some of the other areas of these plants are growing. I see we have people from Minnesota, Missouri, and beyond here. So Goldenseal, it's right up there, perhaps next to what's been known as the king of the forest or ginseng. Here is Goldenseal. Goldenseal likes to grow in similar habitats as ginseng and some of the other plants we'll speak of today. It's generally propagated by rhizome cuttings as well as by seed. It's one that's fairly easy to cultivate. So this is one that we can grow, we can propagate fairly easily and grow to size in a number of systems fairly well. It is similar production to ginseng, though it's not going to be the same. And we'll point out some differences there in terms of fertility studies, etc. Again, this Goldenseal is very popular and in demand on all scales and one we want to look for. The Goldenseal leaf market has really been increasing over the last few years. So not only are buyers of different scales buying the fibrous root and the rhizome of Goldenseal, but also the leaf. We're seeing more and more products of kind of a whole plant that include leaf and root or rhizome. The price range for Goldenseal is anywhere from $25 a dry pound right now up to perhaps 80 or more with certain verifications, etc. Certified organic and cultivated Goldenseal is also reaching a high dollar and is encouraged to be cultivated. We're seeing more and more grown in wild simulated type situations, which we'll dive into a bit more in a few minutes, as well as in woods grown. So Goldenseal has previously been on international lists as threatened or endangered. It's currently on United Plant Savers at-risk list and is of special concern or threatened status in certain states. Again, another reason to cultivate and wild simulate this plant. In North Carolina, last year, the North Carolina Plant Conservation Board put it back on its list of plants to watch and would now documentation is required in the trade of Goldenseal in North Carolina again. Bloodroot is another herbaceous perennial that grows in the woods, one of our first spring ephemerals. We are seeing it go to seed pod here in the southern portion of its range and probably just emerging with that beautiful white flower in the northern part. Bloodroot is propagated by both seed as well as rhizome cuttings, has a particular requirement with its seed to remain fresh. Almost all of the bloodroot that is being sold and traded at this time that we know of is wild crafted, though there are increases in cultivation considerations to increase the cultivation of that for both the raw material as well as the nursery markets. Bloodroot on local digger lists still has a relatively low price, around $2 to $3 a pound. This is black cohosh or Actea rasmosa. So we have the trifoliate leaves, and it's a common thing that black cohosh does in threes, another herbaceous perennial. Propagating this by divisions of these root masses and crowns, as well as by the seed. So black cohosh has been and remains in high demand on all scales as well. It's one of the more popular products coming out of our native woodlands in products such as GlaxoSmithKline carries, Remifemin, down to our local herbalists and smaller scale trades. While there is some cultivation and growing cultivation in black cohosh, still a lot of this is coming from the wild. Your scale of production with black cohosh, as well as the labor that might entail, is something you want to consider when growing black cohosh, which remains on Digger's List at a low price of around $2 a dry pound. That said, we've seen prices quoted all the way up towards $50 a dry pound on small scale with specific verifications. This is one that we've seen a lot planted in the last 5 or 10 years. So hopefully we'll have some more harvests coming out of wild simulated and woods grown operations soon. Blue cohosh, while it might share part of a common name, is a much different genus and species, Calophyllum, than the other cohosh we just mentioned. Blue cohosh loves to be in a rich, well-drained soil, similar to some of these other plants we're talking about. It can be slow growing, but is relatively easy to grow. Blue cohosh can be grown by seed or from divisions. You can see some of the seed turning to a blue berry in the top corner photo. We're hearing more and more about demand for blue cohosh, yet we're not seeing a lot of increased sales from the reports that we're aware of, but one that is being asked about more and more. That said, there's no commercial scale cultivation that we're aware of. Blue cohosh, as well as all of the other plants we've discussed so far and will comment on, are also common plants for the native woodland garden. So are seeing increases in sales in the nursery production world as well. False unicorn, also known as fairy wand or star grubroot, Camellarium luteum, is a special plant to our native woodlands here. Conservation has been an important topic for this plant because almost all of this is coming out of the wild. It is a small root for a relatively high price, but does not conform too well to cultivation as of yet. In recent years, there's been great production done on seeds and growing from seed for this. So we're looking at increased Propagation material to go out. This is one that's often wanted and dug out of the wild because it is seen as a high price on the root lists. On the root lists, up to $100 a dry pound or $30 fresh. The demand remains the same. In about 5-6 years ago, some herbal companies decided to not purchase this plant anymore because of the pressure on wild populations. That said, it remains on root digger lists today. Mayapple is another plant that has limited demand, but it's remained constant over the years, Podophyllum botanicals. This is propagated by rhizome cuttings or can be propagated from the fruit as it's done often in the wilds carried by animals. This is an easy to grow and has a very spreading habit. If you haven't a population of mayapple in your woods yet, you want to consider where you might want to incorporate that into your forest farming endeavor because it does spread. That said, it can coexist and be a companion plant for some of our other species. While mayapple has limited demands, again, it remains on that list for a price of about $4 a pound dry, also with a fresh sale market. Be mindful of mayapple and some of these other, as parts of the plants are poisonous in handling. Spikenard, we're excited to have this on the list again. It's popular, often rising demand for small sales. We'll see where that goes. This is a plant that is quite a bit taller than some of the other plants we've discussed. Comes off with a beautiful white flower and red berry. This one has had cultural demand and remains popular with herbalists and locally, though we don't often see it on diggers lists. That may change. And here we wanted to also mention wild ginger, Asarum canadense. We also have other plants in our woods that go by wild ginger common name in the Hextastylus genus. But in this case, the traded ginger is Asarum canadense. You can tell that by the fuzzy shaped heart-shaped leaf, as well as by the flowering structures or the little brown jugs. These are going to grow in your cooler areas and make a nice ground cover, propagated by division. While this may not be listed on diggers lists or have a high price per pound from all buyers, it does have a nice place in the forest farm as well as in the nursery production. We'll go over a few more plants and then get into some more on propagation and site selection before moving on to the financials. So the next species here is Trillium, or commonly known as Bethroot. So Trillium erectum, the erectum species, is what is commonly traded. That said, over the years, lots of folks will harvest other species of Trillium and trade under the same common name of Bethroot. Here we're showing some of the nodding trilliums, mostly the red and purple, as well as the white, which is Trillium erectum subspecies. So these are another desirable ornamental. So these are common in the nursery industry as well. While they have a low demand, they've had a constant demand over time. They don't have a current price on that, but it's just under $5 a pound. Solomon seal is one of the species that has really gained popularity in the last few years. We're seeing lots of talk about this, increased demand on multiple scales, from local herbalists and small scale sales up to our larger domestic herbal companies. Here we are showing just some differentiation between Solomon seal and Solomon's plume or false Solomon seal, because they can look similar in the woods, showing the different flower structures, whereas the Solomon seal or the Polygonatum biflorum has the flowers on the underside of the stem. The Solomon's plume or false Solomon's will have the flowers coming out the tip or the end of the leaf stem. Again, a sharp increase in this demand and cultivation is greatly encouraged. While we have little growing information available relative to some of the others, it doesn't seem too difficult. And what we're looking at here as researchers is to see what causes that swell in the size. While we have the same species in some areas, we're seeing a very, very big difference in the size of these roots and rhizome structures. So that's one thing we are looking at. Current prices for Solomon seal can be seen up to $40 with verifications and others. So there is a showcase of some of the species we'll talk about today, and we'll go into a few more details, showing some similarities among these groups of plants and companion plants, as well as differences there. Here's some big pictures. We're looking at a ginseng system, but the woods cultivated or woods grown system. So this is pretty intense populations here. Sometimes growers are making beds in the woods and adding amendments. And then wild simulated production, which is what we're mostly focusing on in today's presentation. But we want to recognize that we're seeing an increase in the woods grown production as well. So this is going to be kind of the least expensive, yet give us the lowest yields of the few production types we're talking about. It's going to take the longest time to reach harvest stage of those roots, or in some cases leaves. In the case of ginseng, this produces the most valuable root. So think about that as we apply that to these other species as well. Site selection is our most important factor when growing these woodland botanicals. We can glean a lot from the previous presentations we've seen and the information we do have on ginseng, ramps, goldenseal, and these other plants. But overall, there are some generalizations here about site selection. A shady site, 75%. Most of these species ask for 60 to 80%. A mixed hardwood forest, again, looking for appropriate companion plants, all of which can be each other's that we've described today. We definitely want to have good airflow and water drainage, depending on your slope and your aspect and other factors there. Those are key points. A rich soil, if you have it here in your mountains, high organic matter. In some cases, we can add that as needed. And that your soil needs to stay moist mostly year round. Again, this is going to be different for some of these species. Some plants prefer to be wet in the spring and some in the fall, but we need to have moisture in the soil year round to maintain these perennials. Oops. All right. So looking for other companion plants, again, all of the different species we've talked about today, as well as other trees, other things in the canopy, ferns, and other wildflowers. Take a walk through your woods is often recommended during all the seasons so you can see what is growing. You may miss a spring ephemeral that might be up only for a few weeks if you're only taking account your site in the summer or fall. You want to get a good idea of what your soil is like if you're starting to grow any of these plants in a new area, even if it's not far from another area you're growing in, if it shows different plant community, or you can tell that there's differences in the soil there. You can do a soil test here in the state of North Carolina. You can send that into your state lab through your cooperative extension agent, and there's similar resources in neighboring states. Here in North Carolina, we also have the option to check for nematodes, which we also definitely recommend. If needed, you can correct for any major deficiencies. Again, that's going to be plant specific, and often in the wild simulated method, we don't add any amendments, save some gypsum or lime. While there are a lot of generalizations among these plants and how to grow them and how they grow well together in our native woodlands, we want you to know that what's good for one plant is not always good for another. For example, some previous research that showed ginseng was very helped by calcium and an increase in it. For goldenseal, that was the opposite effect. I can't hesitate to tell you more that production info from the other Woodland botanicals and all of the resources available through the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition and this webinar series can be helpful. Here we're showing more of a woods grown system, which can also be used for nursery production. When growing these plants, your seed and planting stock are very important. You want to have high quality and positively ID'd plant material, whether that's a seed or a whole plant or a bare root that you will then propagate from. You really want to know who you're buying from. Well, we've listed some folks here that sell different seeds. We're not recommending any one, but know that these are high quality providers. And also, please, if you dig your plants from the forest, do it in a legal way and also sustainably for those plants and populations. If you have questions on that, feel free to reach out and we can do our best, or one of the other plant conservation resources can help you to establish a sustainable way to gather that. Collecting and saving your own seeds. So here are some pictures of all the different types of seeds you might receive off these plants. And the requirements for successful seed germination and the following growth may be complex and are definitely unique to each species. Some seeds can be dry stored and others can never be allowed to dry out. It may also take a few months or even years to germinate, depending on cold requirements and other factors. Here's an example showing black cohosh flower into the green seed, and then a dry seed. Another name, it kind of sounds like a rattlesnake when you shake that dry seed head from the photo on the right. These seeds are collected and stored dry. Goldenseal, similar to ginseng, need to be processed before dry storage, similar to a tomato, before cold storage rather. With some of these seeds, you can do a rinse to help keep those seeds clean and safe. Other ideas are to put these out to go through their stratification requirements, which is cold and warm periods, are to kind of wild simulate that as well by making pouches, perhaps of screen, or using screen-lined bins, like you can see in the photo on the bottom of the slide. Adding some clean sand and their fresh seed, bearing that and having that exposed to the elements over a season or multiple seasons. Following that, you can then sow the seed. You may be familiar if buying ginseng seed that you're buying stratified seed. That's seed that has gone through the proper cold and warm processes to make that more likely to germinate. Also want to recognize that with Goldenseal and many other woodland species, that the seedlings may look different from what you may be used to with mature plants. Here's a bucket full of Goldenseal seedlings just emerging in their first year, and some mature Goldenseal with the red berries. I have another picture of some Goldenseal here to look at first year seedlings on the left side of the screen, which is kind of like the cotyledonary leaf. And then here's their second year emerging just a few days ago, actually, next to the hand on the right. So by that second emergence, it's going to have that Goldenseal leaf shape that you may be used to. In the meantime, don't weed those first years out. Other seedlings that can look very different are ramps and ginseng. In addition to seed propagation, rhizome and root cuttings are a way to propagate material and expand populations, whether you're doing that at a harvest or to start a new patch with a plant you don't yet have on your forest farm. So again, this is a very popular method because it's going to be a faster increase in size to harvest than seed, usually by a few years at least for most of these species. Planting stock can be expensive and right now is in very high demand. So another way to encourage and propagate out your beds is to do rhizome and root cuttings. While there are general things to think about with a rhizome or root cutting, you usually want to have a piece of the root and a bud to allow that plant to grow into its own. Many of these have chilling requirements of the root or rhizome propagule as well. And we'll show you a few differences here. When we're dividing Goldenseal, you want to cut these rhizomes into a piece at least a ½ inch or larger. You need to have a bud present if you can, but more importantly, a healthy mass of the fibrous roots is good for Goldenseal. It'll take a long while, but Goldenseal can grow a new plant from just a piece of that fibrous root as well. So that's important to know for Goldenseal. While a bud's important, that mass of fibrous roots is maybe more important. In regards to bloodroot, you need to have that healthy bud and a little bit of food storage as well. For black cohosh, similar to bloodroot, you definitely need to have a bud there, and you want to stay away from rotted parts of the ends of root crown. We've seen some great pictures lately of some fantastic forest farmers that are increasing the buds on their black cohosh over the winter by packing harvested root crowns in peat or another material, excuse me, and having those adventitious buds multiplies to then propagate out in the spring. Generally, most of these plants can be planted in late fall or in early spring. Again, it's common to propagate woodland botanicals following harvest, which are also often in the fall. Digging shallow trenches and covering these with soil to their bud line is important. Plant populations. Plant populations are huge. They can affect the health of your plots in a forest farm. They can also affect whether you may make a return if that is your goal in your forest plots as well. So finding a good plant population to start with and recognizing that these plants will have some selectivity. You may not have as many plants as you began with, for example, or as many plants as you started from seed. We want to give plants lots of space and work with other plants and diversity or companion planting in our wild simulated system. And kind of the closest we'd plant these plants in a woods grown system, I have some numbers listed. Goldenseal at a 6-inch spacing, black cohosh slightly larger at an 18. There are some ongoing studies looking at this and possible yields off that, but we found that the diversity of all our farms and acreages, it's very hard to assign that. So we work more in the per plant or meter square basis for addressing plant population and yield assumptions. It's of course important to regularly maintain your woodland botanical plots. While we may not be spending as much time out in our forested plots as we would in growing an annual in a farm field, we do want to regularly visit all the sites, look for signs of insects, pests, and any damage, potentially fallen trees and branches, and maybe do a little weeding or removal of unintended species in the first few years of establishment. Insects and diseases. While a lot of these plants are healthy and happy in their wild or wild simulated homes, we do have issues that come up, more so in when we plant them in tighter spacing or in more kind of monocropped plots. These are just an example of some leaf blights, leaf rusts, and potential fungal infections on some of the plants we've discussed. Prevention is, of course, the best approach when approaching these diseases or potential insects that may come along. Healthy plants are generally less attractive to insects and diseases, and focusing on your good air and water drainage is very important. Again, healthy plants may mean less fertilizer or none at all in this case, contrary to some other farming. If you want a list of some diseases and insects that affect a lot of these plants, you can find a good list in the back of Dr. Davis and Scott Parsons' book that we'll mention in the resources. In addition to insects and diseases, slugs, voles, and other rodents, as well as deer and turkey, can also be pests on your forest farm plots. Turkey like to scratch seeds. Voles, mice, and rats, of course, can affect all of our roots, and so on. When necessary, you may want to take action. We're seeing various traps, as well as some screen and cages over young plants, particularly seedlings and nursery plants. And of course, the biggest pest may be humans. This used to be just a problem with ginseng. This remains a problem with ginseng. We have had some confiscations, and we have had some help from the law, come in to try to assess that this is human theft of ginseng and other people's plants. We are now hearing that other plants may be targeted as well, including goldenseal and ramps. Security can come in the measure of game cameras, diverse plantings, private property, and more, we're hearing that folks that have awareness of what they have from their neighbors, maybe from their local sheriff, maybe maybe a local hunting group to help them take note of what's going on in their land, maybe a better practice than being secretive. So diving into harvest, harvest tools in the woods, this is still all handwork. So labor of harvest and accessibility for harvest is something that you'll want to consider from the beginning of planting any new forest farming plots. Here you can see various tools. Here's a goldenseal bed. You're looking at kind of like a 1 meter by 1 meter flagged out area that we harvested for research, again, by hand. When harvesting the plants, we really want to protect the integrity of the crop, maintaining that high value so that can go through to your sales or customers. Of course, the sustainability of the patch and the cleanliness of the root when it is coming out to likely go into something for medicine. Through all of these adventures, we always recommend keeping great documentation for your records, as well as traceability of a potential final product. That can be a field notebook that says I planted 30 pounds of ginseng seed on this date, or it can be a harvest log that says I took 2 pounds of goldenseal from my woods today. This can be important for your buyer as well as your own records. Proper identification of these woodland botanicals is of the utmost importance. Some of them have lookalikes that need to be properly keyed out, and making vouchers or dried pressed plant specimens, as you can see in these photos, is one easy way to do that. We consider it the best way to do it because it's low tech. We can do this, most people can do this at home with basic materials, and it serves as a formal identification document that can be taken a picture of and shared with your buyer and or stored in an herbarium as needed. This is a class that we offer, and we have a video on voucher making that we can share through our Western North Carolina Medicinal Herb Growers group for those that are interested. And the utmost focus, of course, should be on quality. Here in the Appalachian region, we have a great, we're known for having very high quality herbs, as well as being the native home to a lot of these medicinals. That said, in the market now, in addition to selling to diggers lists, you have markets that you'll hear from Jeanine about very shortly that may require additional verifications. USDA organic or certified organic is one option there. And the United Plant Savers Forest Grown Verified is another growing label and program that you can take part in and perhaps receive increased prices for these plants. Additional focus on qualities are things like heavy metal tests and other lab analysis that may be required by buyers. And that is all I have for you for today. So I am going to pass it over to Jeanine to talk about the money.
Okay, and Margaret, I'll just say next when I need you to change the slides, please. Thank you very much. So I've been working in this industry for a really long time now, and I'm really excited at how much attention forest farming is getting. The federal government is now really recognizing forest farming, and grants are being made available to many organizations and institutions across the country. So attention is being raised about forest farming. From my conversations with people, and especially at conferences and workshops I've been at this spring, people are under the impression that this is a really good way to make a lot of money. So what I'd like to talk to you about over about the next 15 minutes is what kind of money can you make from forest farming, knowing there's always exceptions, of course, and are your financial expectations realistic? Next, please. Miss Margaret, thank you. So there's a lot that goes into producing these native botanicals. And most of us that grow these plants grow them because we love them. But when you want to do this on a commercial scale, you need to understand that the planting stock and seeds are expensive. And if you've been watching the chat and the questions, finding the planting stock and seed can also be time consuming and difficult. Keep in mind that the roots are still the primary part of the plant used in commerce, although we're pleased to see more and more we're using foliage. But to get harvestable roots of many of these plants take years and years. We're talking often 4 or 5 years or longer. To produce the high yields of these plants, we can't just put out seeds or do a little propagation and walk away for years and come back and expect to get high yields. You will find plants when you come back probably, but if you really want to do this commercially, that area has to be monitored and maintained. And if forest farming is, an income stream for you, keep in mind that you probably won't have any income coming from that enterprise for a number of years. Next, please. Now, if you're just planting a small area to this is all probably not a big issue. You love being in the woods. You love growing these plants. You just enjoy being out there either on your own or with your family, and you don't really count those hours or the minor inputs you put in. I know that's true on my farm. My husband and I really don't keep track of the hours that we put in with the crops and products that we produce. But if you're doing this on a large scale, that's really a different story. Do you have the money and do you have the labor available to really put in the size plantings that you're looking for? You know, if you've got 20 pounds of seed of Goldenseal, what's that going to take to plant that? And do you have the resources to maintain those plantings for the years to come, again, without any income coming back in? Next, please. What are your long-term plans to sell these roots and herbs that you grow? What I found is common assumptions are that buyers are easy to find. I know people that are just picking jars off the natural food store shelf and looking at the back and thinking they can just call that company up and say, I've got Goldenseal for you to buy. Doesn't really work that way. Another assumption is that you can just sell your roots and herbs to the same buyers that wild harvesters do. There are some wonderful Facebook pages out there right now and groups that I'm really enjoy interacting with people. That's where some of our photographs have come from. A lot of wild harvesters out there who also are doing more and more cultivation, but number of the people, the buyers, are posting their lists, as you can see right here. This is from an actual list that came out last month. But growing and cultivating and thinking you're going to sell to the buyers that buy from wild harvesters, it doesn't always work out that way. And do the prices paid for people that are going out into the wild and harvesting material that they've had nothing to do with growing for all these years, are those prices actually going to cover your costs for something that you've grown and tended to for many years? Next slide. And this is the part that's not any fun. Are you set to do up forest farming as a real business? Do you need to be a sole proprietor, an LLC, or do you have to need to take that to the corporation level? Remember, these are plants that you're selling that people are then going to consume. Do you have all the protection in place? Do you have the food safety end covered? Do you need to be licensed for this? If you're growing these as a nursery, do you need to have your nursery licensed with your state Department of Agriculture? Are you zoned in your area to do this? Are there taxes you have to pay? Are you registered with the Farm Service Agency? What kind of insurance do you have? How much of this is necessary or not? You really have to consult an expert, but you should be aware that there are risks if you don't look into these things. Next slide. Now, I don't want to discourage you. There are people out there making money with forest farming. This is Larry Harding of Harding's Ginseng, and Larry is quite famous for what he and his family have done for many, many years. His photographs of his ginseng are all over the internet. And his family does generate most, maybe all of their income from this business. But personally, I don't know very many people who are doing this. Next slide, please. For most people, forest farming is a supplemental income. It can be an important supplemental income. Where I live in Western North Carolina, many people are inheriting land, forested land. They might still be in the middle of their career. They might live somewhere else, but they want to keep that land. And they're like, Jeanine, I just need to find a way to generate enough income from this land to pay my taxes. I don't want to log it at this point. What can I grow? And medicinal herbs are something that often fit that they will generate enough income to pay those taxes. For a lot of people, this is a way to make a little money off something that they love doing otherwise. I can really relate to that. Or they just want to generate a little extra money, or this is a way that they can be a farmer, something they've dreamed of doing their whole lives. Next slide. So forest farming is often a piece of a diversified business. I know that that Carol and Ed are on here with us today, and they were highlighted in the ginseng webinar that we did a few weeks ago. And I want to highlight them again because they are a great example of a family who is running a diversified business for which these forest medicinals are a very large part of it, but they also make product, they offer classes, and they're also doing things like vegetables and selling at the farmer's market. So it's not all just centered on those herbs. Next slide, please. And there's many more examples to find. Just looking through the internet again, I found another business that's in West Virginia called Sacred Roots. I don't know these folks. Well, I might, but I don't remember meeting them. But I was impressed with all the things that they're doing there, including having a gazebo type place that they rent out for events. They offer a hip camp there. They do garden tours. They sell plants in a nursery. So all kinds of opportunities there. And the fresh herb CSA. Next slide, please. So before you start planting any of these herbs, I see a lot of interest in Solomon seal, for example. How do you plan to sell these? Do you plan to sell wholesale or retail? You really should figure this out before you plant anything. There are many options, and they all have different opportunities and different risks. And the same is true for the income potential, how much income you can gain or lose through it. Next slide. What I've learned is many of the growers that I talk to immediately think that they're going to sell to wholesale buyers. Often this is the easiest way to sell if you already have a buyer. The prices per pound are lowest of all the market channels, as is true in anything in wholesale. It's you're dealing in volume. You don't have to spend a lot of time marketing. You've already got your buyer, and you just get that product the way they want it, just to them. Then you don't have to worry about any other marketing. But this is usually in large volumes, like 500 pounds or more. And it can take a while if you're a new forest farmer before you get to that level that you can supply that product the way that that buyer wants it, in the quantities they want it at the time they want it. It could also be that you work with a co-op or an association or something like Appalachian Sustainable Development, their herb hub, in order to supply and fill these large orders. But a real important point here is that you have to be able to maintain those relationships. Next slide. Like I said, some people just look at the back of a bottle and think, oh, I'm going to sell direct to that manufacturer. And they're often surprised to find out that most manufacturers don't buy directly from growers. There are a few, and I've highlighted some of them here, like Diet Herbs is one in our area. Matter of fact, one of their facilities is directly across the street from where Margaret and I work. They're a pretty large company, so they usually buy most of their herbs in fairly large volumes. Red Moon Herbs is a small herb manufacturer in our area. Jeannie Dunn with Red Moon Herbs is a great person for the beginning forest farmer to start with, because she'll often buy smaller quantities and she really wants to support you. Herb Farm out on the West Coast often is more and more buying smaller quantities too, as they go on their mission to buy more cultivated forest products. But I also want you to consider other manufacturers in your area. For example, we have several companies making teas and body care products, and our distilleries are looking for more forest products. Next slide. You can also sell direct to retailers. And if you have some independent natural food stores or even healthcare practitioners, you can sell direct to them. You need to consider how many accounts can you manage, because you're usually driving this stuff all around. You have to have great quality and service. And for many of these stores, see all those jars in that photograph, which is from our French Broad Food Co-op? You're going to be expected to maintain those jars. So you'll be coming through there on a regular basis, just like managing a vending machine company and making sure the jars are filled and changing them out so they're fresh. Next slide. You can make your own value-added products, and more I'm finding that our growers are doing this. They're making tinctures, soaps, body care products, vinegars, tea blends, pet treats and supplements. If you're going to do any of this, you need to know what the laws are in your county and your state pertaining to the food safety. Next slide. And you have to have a presence online. Everyone does. It can be a website. Some people just have a really good Facebook page, but when people hear about you, where's the first thing they're going to do is look online to try to find you. Make sure they can find you. It doesn't have to be a fancy site, but that gives the impression of what your company is and a way for you to be contacted. Next slide, please. So I encourage people to run a diversified business. Here are some examples that we have locally. So grow a variety of herbs. What's really great about our forest herbs is, say you're growing Goldenseal, you get it 5-6 years out, you think you're going to dig it that year, but prices are down. You can leave that Goldenseal in the ground that year. Maybe black hohash prices are up, and you can dig and sell that one. Have different market channels. Look at where local markets value that locally grown and market and label your stuff as such. Think about agritourism. Think about working with local herb schools and herbalists to maybe have people come out and visit your place. Doing the various kinds of e-commerce. We've heard Etsy mentioned on some of our chat today. And look at other related income streams. Many of the people we have growing forest herbs are, for example, very, very knowledgeable about these plants and can be teaching classes and doing consulting. Next slide. So you need to analyze your income, look at your expenses, have a business plan, maybe go ahead and take that 1 semester, adults course at the community college to really learn how to do this well. Next slide. Create a budget, an enterprise budget using realistic numbers. This is one from Kansas. It's focused mostly on culinary herbs, but I find the way they've set it up with having year 1, 2, and 3, it actually can work for us to start figuring out how this would work with, say, Goldenseal or black cohosh or Solomon seal. But just think it through all the way financially. How much money are you going to be putting out there for how many years before income starts coming in? Next slide. The bottom line is you need to know how much you're spending on everything. You need to know how much time is invested, because even if right now it's just maybe you and your spouse doing this, as you grow, you're going to be bringing on employees, and you need to know how much time you're spending planting, maintaining, getting rid of those deer, that kind of thing. What are the costs, the business costs related to taxes and website hosting? And then subtract all that from the income you think you're going to make and find out, is this the kind of profit I'm looking for, or what do I need to change to make it worth my while? Next slide. So you need to be realistic in your financial expectations. I had somebody mention that they thought they would be making $80,000 a year off their forest farming. And they were pretty disappointed when I told them that for most people I know, we're talking more just off the forest farming part. We're talking more in the $2,000 to $8,000 to $10,000 per year. And if you're at $10,000, you're spending a lot of time on this. Next slide. So just some resources that you can look at. Our book on the ginseng and goldenseal and other woodland botanicals with Scott Persons, The Organic Farmer's Business Handbook is a great resource if you've never done farming as a business before. The Organic Medicinal Herb Farmer isn't focused on woodland herbs, but the Carpenters have just done a great job of talking about doing an herb business. And I know that they're revising that book right now. And of course, Rich Ochek for, just how to grow these things. Next slide. Couple of websites. The website Margaret and I maintain, the easiest URL for that is ncherb.org. And then, of course, taking you to our Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition website. Next slide. And with that, I am going to turn our presentation over to Joe. Joe, you want to come on for us now?
That should be on there.
There you are. Okay, Joe, you just tell Margaret when you want her to change slides. And I plan a couple questions for you if I need to.
Change the slide, Margaret. There you go. Okay. I'm Joe from up the creek, and they asked me to come on and talk about a on the ground approach to growing, especially Goldenseal. And you can switch to the slide. That right there is some Goldenseal in there, but that is a couple friends of mine, one of which owns a tea shop in Abingdon, Virginia, and her daughter in some ginseng. We're gathering some leaves. You can switch the slide. And there's some Goldenseal. It's young shoots coming up it was really hard, to be honest, like to find my Goldenseal picks because it's just not such a showy plant as ginseng is, and I actually felt bad. Go ahead and switch the slide. Okay, there's one in its glory. It's not got Goldenseal doesn't really have such a. It's got actually a really weird flower structure on it. Kind of comes out like its own petiole coming off the leaf. And if many of you have never seen it before, I find it's kind of difficult to grow up here where I'm at, and I've seen it lush patches along the Ohio area of the mountains, eastern Ohio, Kentucky. Seems to really like that, and up into New York. I did get some tips from Jeanine yesterday that I'm going to try and see how that goes. But I started my Goldenseal patch in 2004, and I've been dividing it with propagations through rhizome cuttings and little bit of seed collection, but that's a tricky one with the seed. The propagating from the roots is always seems to be easy to go. And I did, it's hard to get stock right now. So, you got to propagate your own and just make sure you're not getting into any fungus problems. Look at a good, healthy root. Go ahead and switch the slide. That's a nice, healthy patch of its own coming up, and you can see in the top right corner there's some young ones, and that's what you really want to see in your patch. Is that can you see my arrow, or can you point on that, somebody? Yeah, there, right there, there's a young one right there. So you want to look to make sure you're not just aging out your patch. You want to make sure you get some babies coming along underneath, and as you harvest some, I especially harvest for tinctures. It's really easy to make a tincture with. I order some alcohol out of Oregon, 190 proof, and wash the roots and then let it sit in there for a while, and it makes a very potent tincture, very popular too. Switch the slide. And there is false unicorn. It's one of my favorites. Unfortunately, I can't. It's very slow growing. Jeanine told me yesterday she saw one with leaves that were like 12 inches wide. I'd love to see that, but it's just kind of a side hobby of mine up in the corner of my wood patch. And I should speak a little bit about that. We bought the farm as a family back in 2000, and there was woods all over it. And like the bio said, I bought a bunch of seed in early 2000, and I had read the book. Let me bookmark that. Switch slides there, Margaret. Okay. There was I bought the ginseng seeds, and 30 pounds is it's an amazing amount of seed when you're sowing it by hand. And I'll go ahead and bookmark, let me write that down so I can add to that in my talk, is the labor part of this is getting a realistic. Okay, switch slides. There's a bucket of seed. So I've been saving my own ginseng seed. My patch has gotten big enough now that I harvest the seed, and I've gotten into, I'm not much of a cat person, but I've learned in the past few years living in the sticks that I like cats over rats, and voles and shrews and moles and anything that can put a hole in my seed, I want destroyed. So yeah, I've gotten some cats because the mice and shrews and chipmunks and everything else is getting it. And I hate to know, yes, I know there's some bird lovers out there and they're like, oh, you're killing all the birds, but sorry, I got ginseng. Okay, switch the slides, please. Okay, there we go. There's a bed of ginseng. I thought I had the Goldenseal in there. No, it's not. Okay, switch. And that's the same day we were harvesting some of the leaves. Okay, and I'll speak to that right now. It's the leaves contain just as much of the constituent that you want, or inside the plant that you want, is like in the ginseng. And I've gotten a lot of sales out of just the leaves alone, and I'm not destroying my ginseng patch like my friend there. She's really has a lot of sales of just adding ginseng to her teas, and so my daughter and her daughter and myself, we pick a bunch of leaves, we let the plants get on and age so that they get a bunch of their growth in the root for that year to do their natural thing, because ginseng, like a lot of the forest medicinals, are very slow growing, and so we let them leave their leaves on, and so that it can put a lot of its energy into the seeds. And so I get like a double whammy there. I get seeds and I get leaves that I sell. Obviously you don't get as much weight in the leaves as you do the roots, but you can continue your patch on, and it's just another added product. Okay, switch the slides, please. Okay, something else I do, because I got into this ginseng and then CBD happened and everybody started, wanting more and more interest was shown in natural products for medicine. Reishi's been targeted as an anti-cancer mushroom, and it's also very easy to make extractions and tinctures from. So I obviously can't really grow that. I guess I could if I wanted to get into a controlled environment, but there's plenty of it in the hemlocks that are dying around our forests, and it likes hemlock. It grows on it. So I've made quite a bunch of tincture with this, as well as some chaga, which I should have sent you some pictures of the chaga, because because of what I do with Goldenseal and ginseng, there's hey, can you get any of this kind of questions asked? So I keep some reishi tincture on the shelves. Okay, switch. There's some reishi that we picked. One day my daughters and her friends picked some too. Okay, switch. All right, something else that grows along the farm creek. I have a ton of bee balm, and that I've been selling that and to tea shops. And actually, there's a distillery that's bought some bee balm. So there's plenty of. If you live in a place where you can grow ginseng, Goldenseal, black cohosh, you live in these places. There's other. I didn't have to do anything to this patch. This isn't something that I'm growing, just happens there naturally. I keep it protected from the cows so they can't chow it down. And then what I can't, if I have a bigger order, for especially the flowers, then I'll go off the farm and harvest. But go ahead and switch. Something else that I've had a little bit of a demand is grown, not much of it. I think it's an amazing one, but ghost pipe. It's a plant, not a fungus, and actually has a parasitic relationship, but it grows a lot around where I live, grows on the farm. Actually, that's something I picked off the farm in one day. Usually in late summer, you see a lot of it coming up, but I tincture that with the same alcohol that I do the roots with. Okay, switch. That's it, getting ready to get alcohol poured on it. Okay, switch. And there's Lori and I in the ginseng patch digging. Okay, switch. Yeah. So I guess I want to talk about labor. I wrote that down. You can take my mug off there now and put something else up there, like a plant or something. Um, one thing people underestimate with this is like when I got into this, I wanted to do something with the ground and the forest, and I was traveling a lot and wanted something to grow that was easy to grow. It was not easy to sow, I'll tell you what. It grows very easy, but once you get that thing established, there's a ton of labor because it's not a place that, equipment getting in there, you're going to mess up your ground. You want it, I keep it as wild simulated as possible, but it's really a lot of labor involved in sowing just one bed of ginseng, and it's not something to be underestimated at all, and it's something to be valued if you are trying to do a spreadsheet like what Jeanine was encouraging. Is the labor should be up there, and don't just definitely count that, and it's help is worth it when you can find good help and you can get out there and you can there's harvest it is a lot of labor, not just putting it in the ground. You've cut digging roots up is no easy task because you're trying to preserve those roots so they're not chopped up in a bunch of pieces when you get them up, so that they're nice and they look good for the buyer. They're attractive. They're free of dirt when you wash them. I mean, there's a ton of labor that goes into this. However, it is easy to grow. You're not out there. I'm not out there, maintaining it. I don't spray my plants with anything unless there's like a really wet year. I might get a biofungicide on there because it does get ginseng, especially gets a blight on it that'll start eating at the leaves. But I've got so much of it that it maintains its own at this point, and it's got it needs a lot of airflow in order to keep that down. So I try to keep it as balanced out as possible. What else did I want to talk about? Yeah, I wrote down value added here because the wholesale. I don't have I have an impressive amount of plants there, but I make most of my money off of these plants. Most of the profit comes from me direct to a buyer, with tinctures especially. I don't have the weight, unless I get a phone call from someone who's looking for a bunch and there's like several people that want to throw in together, then that's something that I've always been interested in. But I just because of by grace and luck alone, I had a buyer at the tea shop, and then that led to other things, and then a distillery that wants, ginseng root or leaves, or even Goldenseal's been talked about with gin, and there's a lot of botanicals that go into gin, and so people are. I think what happened was there is at some point in the past, I think COVID helped, and I think that the CBD something happened where there's more and more demand for plant-based. Um, okay, I'm looking at getting a question already. Is that a question for me? I think I'm just going to stop talking at this point, and somebody can ask me a question because this is getting awkward now. I'm just rambling.
We appreciate the rambling, Joe. If I have a question for you for everybody,
Okay.
is if you were a beginning forest farmer, how would you consider going about the marketing? You kind of fell into something that led to something else that led to something else. But if you were just getting started, how would you think about selling those roots and herbs?
I read that book when I first got started called Green Gold that I'm sure people have gotten a hold of. That was misrepresentation of the numbers in that book. And when you start doing the numbers and you think you can make all kinds of money off of a half acre of something like ginseng, it's just crazy. It's just not right. It takes a long time to grow. And so as a new farmer, the good old handshake of walking into a door. I mean, some of these plants that we're talking about getting started, if it was a new farmer, you're looking at like, if you put new stock out for Goldenseal, especially 3 years unless you put a good investment of stock out, and I mean like enough that you can harvest from in a reasonable time without waiting that time period. As a new farmer, I'd say the good old handshake of walking into a door of somebody that you think might buy from you, and that's how you get it started, is a relationship based.
Great. Thank you. We had to hear it from a person really doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Kate,
have a lot of, yeah, we have some questions coming up in the chat. Wanted to see if would you like me to move into those?
You can open the floor, sure.
Okay, cool. I'll add Margaret in here to spotlight as well. Yeah, and just invite you if you have any questions to add them to the Q&A feature, and we'll see what we can address. We'll be on until 7:30. So start here at the top from Jamie saying, thank you so much for putting this together. Much love and appreciation. Jamie has two questions. The first one is, they've had a very hard time finding sources for goldenseal seeds, farming and restoration work. They're in New York and the wild populations are limited. They have some sites that could work for planting that might be suitable. But just, I know Jeanine, you referenced a little bit of the seed sourcing as well, but wanted to just bring that question forward for Goldenseal. And let's see, there was another question around, I think it was Solomon seal maybe. But yeah, if you would be up for sharing just about procuring seeds, and just going to open the floor to all of you if you have any response to that.
and then this is a huge problem, and as there's more interest in forest farming, it's coming, the awareness is being risen among those of us working in this industry. You know, because so many of us want to conserve these plants by helping cultivate them and getting our buyers to buy cultivated material, the thought of going out and digging stuff from the wild to use it to get your farming started just doesn't feel right. So we need to be working together on this. There's got to be some people that say, I'm going to be nursery. That's what I'm going to do. We do have an example around us. Red Root Natives is a woman in the Asheville area that does grow some of these plants more as planting stock, but she's one nursery. You know, we could use a dozen more of those. This is a project that Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition, working with Appalachian Sustainable Development, and Katie, I think there's another partner on that too, isn't there?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't speak to that.
So Margaret, do you want to, we're trying to address this issue, but it is a big one. And then finding good product too. There's some people have mentioned buying off of Etsy or Amazon or something like that. You're really taking a risk there of not getting the plant material of the quality you need, and sometimes not even the species that you need. Margaret, did you want to say something there?
I'll just add that in our search for propagation material, lots of folks in this room or in the Zoom room, and lots of us are looking to find better ways. And in the meantime, I think it's important to recognize where the material you may be buying is coming from, and if that aligns with your business values and conservation values. Just recognizing that a lot of this material is being dug from wild populations, perhaps even those that you may be trying to conserve. So while there's huge demand right now, just be real mindful of where that material is coming from, and how you yourself can work to increase your own material as well.
Mm-hmm. And some of it is going to come from the wild. However, you've got to know your state laws. In North Carolina, it is illegal to dig goldenseal or collect seed from wild populations now. So you should be aware of those regulations that are there. And somebody's mentioning some of the nurseries. The thing that's happened is these plants have become very, very popular to put in woodland gardens. So our nurseries are finding that they can make a whole lot more money selling individual plants to gardeners than selling a bag of roots to someone like Joe to put into his woods. So kind of an interesting situation. How about another question there, Katie?
Okay. Jamie's also just had a quick question about sales price of spikenard, what the range of the sale prices are on that.
Margaret, did you look up spikenard?
I don't have a list right in front of me, but I recall it being around $3 to $4 a dry pound.
Great. Okay, then also question, what are some forest medicinals that would do well in Mississippi, zone 8A, which is considered a subtropical climate?
The one I know that there's been a fair amount of work on in Mississippi is mayapple. But other than that, I'd need to talk to some herbalists from down in that region.
Anything else to add, Joe, Margaret?
That's getting pretty warm and low elevation relative to some of the native ranges here, but it's also, some of these plants attend to cultivation and more diverse habitat than others, where you might not get a flowering ginseng or goldenseal in that area. You might be able to grow some black cohosh to size, for example.
Great. We have a question to all presenters, wondering, is poaching of forest farmed crops on the rise, the same or decreasing from your perspective? Just wanting to hear where you all think that the status.
First of all, when you're stealing it from someone's forest farm, it's not poaching, that is theft. Okay. So, Joe, is this something you're worried about?
Well, I know a couple people who have lost a lot of ginseng, and they come when it's been raining for several days and the moon is full. It's anytime those conditions are like that, I'm on edge the whole night. I don't sleep. It's yeah, because if somebody finds it, then it's an easy dig, and they don't care that it's been there for 20 years or whatever. And the fact that it takes so long, it's pretty heartbreaking. You know, I know an old 75-year-old man down the road that lost his entire patch that he, called it his kid's college education. And I mean, he had it in there for 35 years and it was gone. Just, they got most of it in one night. So yeah, I mean, security is an issue. It's something with some of these are valuable plants, and there's some people that just don't care. So yeah.
And
Mhm.
ramps are another one that people are losing a lot of. I gave a presentation last month at a conference, and we spent a lot of time talking about security. And it really is a different game now. We have got tools at our disposal. And I think this should be something you consider when you talk about what your expenses of production are going to be, is cameras. We now have very small cameras that we all can monitor everything that's going on with our phones. And these cameras can distinguish between a deer and a person. So it's not like the old trail cams that many of us were using that pretty much showed us who took our stuff after they already took it. We can now be monitoring in real time. And we're taking more of a community approach instead of trying to keep things real secret and think that nobody walks through your land. Engaging neighbors, watching out for each other is an approach that people have been trying about the past 10 years and looks like it's having some effect.
Cameras are excellent. Even the presence of a camera that doesn't work. I mean, if you have an old camera, you can just that doesn't work, don't tell anybody that doesn't work. You just put it up there, and I mean, it's a poacher doesn't know if it works or not. So it's good to have something up there that is an obvious camera.
Also want to share that we're finding more and more, well, I'm not sure if we're seeing an increase. We're definitely talking about it a lot more, and we have a lot more people putting plants into the woods and concerned about security. But it used to be, secrecy was key. Now we are hearing that talking more about what you have and being open with your neighbors if that's appropriate in your situation, as well as having groups like hunting groups, like mentioned in the presentation, or other groups helping to kind of scout your land, may be a good strategy as opposed to trying to remain secretive. Of course, that's going to be dependent on your own locale and your neighbors and such, but consider that as well.
Great. We have a question here from Kelly, noticing that slugs love to eat the flowers of goldenseal.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
wondering what you all might treat that with.
So slugs have been my nemesis ever since I started working with Goldenseal 35 years ago. And what we have found in our research plots to be most effective in areas that this is a problem is using Surround, which is a kaolinite clay-based product. actually did some research with the USDA on this for a little bit. It coats the leaves with this clay. It makes the plants look awful, but the slugs really didn't like it. If you can have other things out there that will eat the slugs, that works, but I have not found that to be very successful in most forest settings. And other people just don't have a problem with slugs. So it all depends on your particular situation. Joe, do you have trouble with slugs?
Just in a wet year, if it's a really wet year, but typically we haven't had a super wet year in a while. I mean, just it all depends. So,
We
yeah.
find slug damage in seedlings, whereas when the plants get a bit bigger, they're going to be less susceptible and can afford to lose a little leaf surface. So any product or other deterrent that we might using is usually in our kind of seedling beds in areas that have those. And considering your mulch source, if you're adding a leaf mulch, maybe consider grinding it up first to have less slug habitable. And then of course the common remedies like totes of beer and things like that to help dry them out can be used in these kind of situations as well, depending on your scale.
Great, thank you all. The next question is, how do you use cats for voles and mice control? And just wondering, like, around, are your patches near your house? Are they staged?
There's several patches. Yeah.
Okay, so are the cats like further away too? And
No, they actually, I'm very lucky. The cats wander, and they have a little place that they go. It's not, it's semi-comfortable in the wintertime. I'm sure they've adapted, and I think I've got 8 of them over there now. And I don't know. I couldn't tell you if the voles population's gone down or not. It makes me feel better just their presence there, and occasionally a dead mole or vole showing up, or a shrew that's there that I know. I just, the seed damage they do is crazy. I mean, I do put the bags on the seed pods, the little potpourri bags, the little lacy things you get at the art and craft store. I cover as many as I can up with those, but it's a battle to get them before the little critters get to them. So yeah. I did want to respond while I was talking is about this. Could elderberry grow in the subtropical question? Would that work for subtropical? Is an elderberry an option?
Definitely.
There's got to be some medicinals down there, something like that they could capitalize.
There are.
on.
We need to talk to our southern herbalists. Phyllis Light, the first person that comes to my mind as giving us more information down that way.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is, how sensitive are Goldenseal, ginseng, and ramps to municipal water that's treated with chlorine? Wondering if a patch needs to be watered during a dry spell, and in more developed areas, should they use rainwater only or water from a garden hose?
Once they get established, they tend to do pretty well on their own. I would keep them moist. I don't know. Jeanine might know more about. I don't think the seed germination, as long as it was kept moist and not left to dry out, and once they get a few years old, they kind of tend to themselves, unless it's super dry.
That's been my experience, particularly with Goldenseal, is we went through a 3 to 4 year drought here back a while ago, and the established plants would come up in the spring. And it's like they were like, oh, this is not going to be good. And they would flower and fruit really early. The fruiting would be less, but then they would go down. And it's like they were just going into this protective mode. And they just didn't keep up there, where they were losing a lot of water through that foliage for very long. So we lost weight gain over those years, but we didn't lose the plant so much. Now, little seedlings didn't make it unless you watered them. But I found that at least in our case, both the bloodroot and the Goldenseal were both pretty tolerant of just kind of going into hibernation during those dry spells.
Yeah, I agree with that.
More dangerous to us is when we go into those real extended wet spells, and things just never dry out, and then you start getting rot.
Yeah. Great, thank you both. And just want to thank Margaret. Margaret's answering some of these questions in writing. So just want to invite you, if we haven't been able to address your question verbally, that there's probably an answer waiting for you in the Q&A feature. And we're just going to end the session today with this last question to you all, wondering how, from your perspective, you see we can improve education around forest farming these species.
Could you repeat that?
Yes. How we can improve education around these species, like what do you think is needed for forest farmers education wise, and especially around maybe things the coalition can provide and things that we offer as partners and farmers as well.
Well, I'm excited about all of these new projects that are starting, because so many of these plants we don't really know how to cultivate on a commercial scale. So there's lots of information out there from botanists and from gardeners, but just like what you do in your garden to raise a tomato won't necessarily work for you to do as a farmer who's trying to make money. It's the same with these plants. So I think all these projects where people are looking at how to grow these plants commercially so you can actually make income, so you'll keep doing it, are really, really important. I think us continuing to educate the consumer about the threats that we're putting on these wild plants, not just from the fact that we're buying them to use them, but we're losing so much of their habitat for so many different reasons. So to encourage more cultivation and be willing to pay the price that it's going to take for someone like Joe to keep growing it. If Joe keeps looking at his bottom dollar at the end of the year and goes, this isn't worth my while, he's not going to keep doing it.
Oh, I will.
You get those prices up there.
Crazy like that. I love those things.
Do you guys want to contribute to that?
I did. I want to say, like, in response to the education question, I mean, you and Margaret are such a valuable resource to all these plants that, like, I mean, there's so much information that you guys have at least have your fingers in on or know of, and so, like, I'm glad that I'm glad that there's still momentum in this and that there's excitement about these plants that. The internet is just full of different articles and research projects that have gone on for this, and just getting out there and doing it and having a passion for these special plants is really important. And it's a different kind of farming. Forest farming is a new thing, and people are looking at the woods saying, what can I do with this, instead of like just letting their cattle graze wildly through them and trampling everything down to just hard soil. So it's good to see these plants making a comeback, because they're definitely over harvested in the wild. And so when you can have something like that on your property, it's a special feeling when you have a patch of Goldenseal or a patch of ginseng. And so yeah, even if the bottom dollar was off, I'd still do it because there's a patch of ginseng out there.
Well, you mentioned the wild harvesters too, Joe, and I am so pleased to see how many of our wild harvesters now are very concerned about conservation moving forward and encourage each other to plant seeds and propagate and start their own little patches. 30 years ago, it was not that way at all.
No.
And so we've got a new generation of wild harvesters out there that want to pass this on to their kids and their grandkids. So there's a conservation angle there that I think is pretty exciting too.
Definitely.
Margaret, do you have anything to add to that around additional for education moving forward?
I'm excited that we have an increased network and that we can all talk in these formats at line, but I know that our most favorite way and maybe most beneficial way of sharing knowledge is in person and with hands-on with a lot of these. So I'm looking forward to a lot of people that are here today or that attended programming with us or others along the way are now offering education too. So I definitely would recommend reaching out to your forest farming peers, whether that be on Facebook or if you have a neighbor or someone in your area that you could do some hands-on fun with. So just want to recommend that as a way to learn and grow through all of this. And of course, events.
And all the events we have coming up.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for that plug, y'all. The Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition has a number of in-person events that partner organizations across the Appalachian Range are leading. So there's going to be one in North Carolina, one up in Ohio, and one in Virginia. And so Stesha, if you're up for putting that in the chat, just so people can connect to those offerings, but just so everybody knows, that's on the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition's website. And so this is the last event of our series. And now that things are warming up, we definitely encourage you to come meet us in person and hang out. And also, I just want to put a quick plug in before you hop off. If you're willing to fill out a really quick survey, we'd love to hear from you about the session and any input you have. You're also welcome. There's an open space there for responses. If you have ideas of things that you would like the coalition to offer in the future, we'd love to hear from you through that format. And Stesha's putting that in the chat as well. And just want to thank everyone for convening tonight, joining us, spending an evening together. Joe, Jeanine, Margaret, thank you all for sharing your expertise and wisdom and for tending this field in all the ways that you all do. It's always there's a special energy being connected to the people who are tending these plants. So I definitely feel it present among our speakers and among the folks tuning in today. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Katie and Stesha, for keeping everything running so smoothly for us.
Yes, yes.
Nice seeing your smiley faces again.
Yep. And they'll be living in perpetuity on our website, just to remind everyone that this is recorded and it will be up next week with professional closed captions. So, yep, living resource. Yeah, with that, we'll go ahead and close our session today. And if you're hopping off and you're still up for taking that survey, we'd love to hear from you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks all.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.